there, useful if you want to go to it. We are also on Meetup, so if you find us on there, that's where you'll find the most up-to-date meeting information. Forgot to update the Slack. Okay, so we moved our Slack to the Refresh Austin Slack, which is like refresh.slack.com or something like that. If you go to refreshaustin.com, you'll have the link to it there. I should update that for next time. But yeah, we moved the Slack, so everybody's, Refresh Austin is a bigger community of everybody tech, dev, UI, UX, project managers, stuff like that. So we're all in the same Slack, so we all have access to everybody, and we have our own channels for us on Rails, Austin RP, and then Ruby channels and all that good stuff where we still hang out as a community. We benefit from their nonprofit status, so we get the paid version without paying for it, so that's good. We're also on Austin on Rails on Twitter. You can, if you're having a problem finding the Slack channel, or if you need to get in touch with us there on Austin on Rails, or my Twitter handle is at the bottom as well, so you can get in touch with me. Code of conduct, we have one. Please read it if you're not familiar. Be nice and welcoming to everybody here. If there is a problem that comes, please talk to us organizers and we'll address it. We want to make sure everybody has a good time. Parking, street parking on Monday and Tuesday is free after 6 p.m. If you're like me, get there. If not, Country Factory is validating. This goes up, sometimes it's true, sometimes it's not, so ask front desk. They took it away for a while and they brought it back, so you get it for $7 now. So ask the front desk for validation. Otherwise, there's a couple of parking lots around, like close by. Agenda real quick. Who had some pizza? Who mingled? Congrats, you all passed the first test. Sort of a surprise first talk, I had a blip and forgot in my memory that I had agreed with Ethan to do the first talk, so I didn't announce it on the meetup group. So congrats everybody, you're getting a bonus talk. 2 for 1. 2 for 1, and then we'll get a 10-minute break and mingle again and finish up the pizza. I think I'm getting right with the proportion. Some people here seem to not want to eat, so when I finish the pizza, not leave anything for anybody here, right? Although if we leave a couple slices for the guy at the front desk, we'll be happy. But the rest, we should eat. Thank you, Ariel, like that.
You're welcome. Thank you.
And then we'll have the second talk, which is get your shit together with Gal. And we'll have the room till 9, so we can stay here and then go and continue doing that. Otherwise, if a group of you want to go together to a bar close by, feel free to do that. We used to do them regularly, but most people are here, they'd like to stay here, no need to break that up apart and go somewhere else. So as long as we're here, we can all socialize. Thank you to our sponsors, Capital Factory, where you're at right now. Capital Factory got a lot of events and meetups that are happening, so check out their events page. Pizza sponsor, that would be me. Since this is the beginning of the year, we are looking to set out the calendar for the rest of the year, so we are looking for sponsors and speakers. If you work at a company that's hiring, this is a great opportunity for that. If you want to practice talking about any subject, this is a good place for this too, right? If this is the first time, it's a good group here that will not judge you. It will be safe to get your first talk going with us. Or if you're a seasoned speaker but you still want to practice your talk before you give it at RubyConf or RailsConf, that's also a good place to do it. If you're hesitant, there are people within the community who've done a few talks before who are willing to coach. All you have to do is just ask, and ever done this before, that kind of stuff, we will help you set something up together. So think about that if you'd like the doc. And again, talk to me or Justin about putting you on the schedule for all these things. Anybody has any announcements not related to your own company, like something, an event that's happening that you'd like to share, something related to Ruby, something related to Rails, something related to development, Austin, somebody, Ariel?
So Martin Fowler is coming to do a little book promotion thing. He'll be at the AT&T something or other on Friday. Take a look at the Day-to-Day Texas website. I'll probably have a link to there. It's free, first come, first serve. Bring your book about a time. I don't know the guy, but I'm going.
What book was it?
Refactoring the JavaScript edition.
Anybody else? All right. How many here for the first time? Awesome. Great, great. So we'll do a quick intro so everybody's here familiar with each other. I'll start. My name is Yusuf. I run a company called Bear and Giraffe. I hired my first 2 employees in January. So might be more white hair coming out. We'll see. So I'm not looking to hire anymore. Although if we land another big project, that might be coming up. So, and we do software development, web development, Rails, mostly consulting for startups and companies around. I also personally act as a fractional CTO for startups who don't have a technical partner or a CTO on board. So if you know somebody who has an idea, knows their domain very well, but doesn't have technical expertise, come talk to me. For that little icebreaker, just get the ball rolling. There are any New Year resolutions that anybody has? I don't necessarily create a list, but the one thing that I have in mind is just be more present in person and less online. So it goes back to the conversation we were having before. So that's my New Year resolution. I'll pass it on to Gal if you'd like to.
Sure, I'm Gal. I'm going to hear about me later at the talk. Not hiring anything, always open to hearing suggestions. I'm doing freelancing. Don't have much availability at the moment, but it could change. My New Year resolution is to be less resolute. Too much.
Cool. Personally.
My name is Anthony Wilson. I'm a data engineer at Ascension, and we are hiring for a QA engineer. Anyone who is in continuous integration or any like Jenkins, DevOps tools. And I didn't make any resolutions.
Jeff Frost. I'm a VP of engineering at a company called Procore. We do construction project management software as a service. We've got an office downtown that used to be just CS and sales, about 250 people there. We are bringing engineering to Austin March 1st. So I'm going to be the engineering lead here. And we're primarily a rail shop. So if you know anyone, we're going to be opening a bunch of recs starting March 1st.
Remind me of your name, sorry?
Jeff. You probably talked to Jamie.
I did.
I think waiting outside, I need to go let her in.
Okay.
But I wanted to do my introduction first.
Okay, cool.
No resolutions for me.
And the weird part is that we were going earlier about names that start with J, and your name starts with Jeff. I'm like, but I talked to Jamie, and I'm like, wait, no, she's a woman. You're not her. Whatever. It's like confusing to me right now. All these J
We
names.
look super simple.
All right.
I'm Christian. I work for a health insurance startup in town called Time Health. We are also hiring, but we are a JavaScript shop. So probably looking for a product person or a project manager, DevOps, and definitely back-end guys. So
Cool.
my resolution is to hire people this year.
I'm Dylan. I work for the same company, front-end engineer, doing JavaScript, only JavaScript. What he said about hiring, and then New Year's resolution, I'm probably going to try and get my Skydive license this year. Forgot to do that last year.
Awesome.
working also, and then New Year resolutions, would they do the stuff I didn't do last year?
Success.
Awesome. I'm Ethan, and you'll hear more about the company I work for briefly in my talk. New Year's resolution is more vacation. I'm going to take more vacation this year than I did last year, which was kind of cool. So,
I'm Mike, I work remotely for a small medical startup, and we aren't hiring at the moment. I don't have a specific New Year's resolution, but I like yours. I would like to take at least some vacation this year. I didn't take any last year.
Your resolution, is it to take other people's resolutions?
It's to consolidate the best of everyone else's. Yeah.
My name's Josh. I work for WeInfuse. And I guess my New Year's resolution is to switching from C# to Ruby on Rails. So get really good at that really fast. So awesome.
Are you hiring?
And he's out there.
Make sure we get it in twice.
Yeah.
So, I'm Brian Johnson. I'm the co-founder of a company here in town called WeInfuse. We created a software application for the healthcare space that we used to operate in, and we just went through another growth round, so we're hiring. So my New Year's resolution is to finish hiring out our dev team.
Hi, I'm Sarah. I am not hiring, but I am one of USO's January hires, so feeling good about that. And New Year's resolution, a little bit like Jason, I'm switching languages, so I am more in PHP and Python, and I'm switching into Rails, so my New Year's resolution is basically learn Rails as fast as freaking possible.
My name is Justin. I work for PowerSchool as one of their lead developers. We are a Rails shop. I think the budget's being put forward this Friday, but we will be hiring software engineers and DevOps. We work in the education space. And Icebreaker, my New Year's resolution has been budgeting myself. So I got a budget app and been keeping myself honest.
Hi, my name's Steven. I'm a lone Rails developer at my company, Baxter Planning. We are looking for Java people. If you want to program in Java, let me know. This year, I want to commit some time to an open source Rails related project, Gin something. Anyone knows a good one? Let me know. We'll go that way.
My name is Constantine, and I'm a C and Go developer, and I also have an interest in Erlang, Elixir, and Ruby. And my New Year resolution is to learn C++.
My name is Steven Wentling. I'm a Rails developer with BigCommerce. I worked at Procore for a year and a half until recently. So, hi guys. Basically I'm a Rails developer with BigCommerce here in town, just across the street with Marielle. We are hiring for a member on the team. Otherwise, New Year's resolutions, I would say just read more books.
You did my intro, so thanks. My New Year's resolutions, get more sleep, but then Netflix rolls out all the shows all the time. Start committing to Gem, so I got the keys to Dry System Rails. So if you're interested, check out Dry System Rails. It's to incorporate the dry RV gems into the Rails stack. And I'm working on fixing some of the bugs for that right now. Was to like lose a bunch of weight and stuff, but then you give me all this pizza, it's so good. So I'm just like, 1 out of 3 ain't bad, right?
Hi, I'm Ann. I'm a full stack engineer at Cover My Meds, which is based in Ohio. They may or may not be hiring. I don't know. They seem to be always hiring, so look into it. Icebreaker. I've been working through, sort of after your talk, the design patterns in the ebook. So there are 14 design patterns in there, and
kids and my wife and I are trying to budget, figure out their future. So, we're working on budgeting.
Cool. So, two people need budgeting recommendation, budgeting apps recommendation. If anybody has it.
I'm Alex. I work at a company called Ticketbud. It's also listed in things like Eventbrite. We're not hiring. I'm not looking. And what was the other one? New Year's
resolution.
Yeah, I want to get more into the Flutter framework, which is a cross-platform mobile framework, and hopefully get mapped in the apps for some Flutter.
Hi, my name is Vincent. I work for UT, the College of Engineering. I develop curriculum for high school engineering and computer science courses. And the program is called Engineering World. It's pretty cool. We're in about 300 schools around the country. And we're not hiring. I'm surprised I got hired. And you know, the New Year's resolutions change from day to day, but I like them best when I go on Netflix. I think I'm going to try to watch less Netflix, do more kind of brain things. So, thank you.
Awesome. Jamie, like the.
Yes, you know my name. I'm Jamie. I'm not an engineer. I work for Procore and I do enablement for engineering. I don't know what Jeff said yet, but we are hiring I forget name it. We're hiring for it. New Year's resolution is really just to successfully build an R&D team out in Austin and have friends out here. I moved with no friends.
You have one friend.
Oh, I have you. You don't I have Jeff. But
That's a big win.
We can all work on that together
Such
here.
a win.
More friends for everybody. Your turn. Yes. We're not escaping from this.
Okay, my name's Jeanette. I'm from El Paso. I've been in Austin for about 6 years. I'm a freelance photographer. I do events, weddings, portraits, creative portraits. What else? Yeah.
Do you have a New Year's resolution?
It's more like getting equipment that I want. Is that a resolution? I guess like budgeting for that. And that's pretty much it. Just like focus more on the business side of my work and grow and invest back in business and all that. So,
Sounds good.
Yeah.
Anybody need a wedding, engagement, photographer, whatever, to contact them. All right. Without further ado, we're gonna get started. So Ethan, take us away.
Okay. Hey, everybody. My name is Ethan Brooks, as I mentioned a minute ago. And I am the North American Community Lead at a company called TopTal. If you haven't heard of TopTal, in a nutshell, you could think of us as a professional network for senior level freelancers. We help match expert developers, designers, project managers, product managers of all sorts with clients who need them. So if you're looking to freelance, come talk to me. If you're looking for talent, come talk to me. But I'm not here to really talk about TopTal. Today, what I'm here to talk about is goal setting. So on my team, specifically what I oversee is I help build out the professional development programs that we run for members of our network. So in addition to matching people with clients, we offer things like speaker training for people who want to do more public speaking. We do academies in emerging tech. We have volunteer programs. And every year we run a series of events on goal setting because everybody in our community runs their own business. So setting goals and accomplishing them is an important part of what we can help them do. So that's a little bit about what I'm going to talk about today. This is a topic that's actually been kind of near and dear to my heart for quite a while. Before I did what I do now, I was a freelance developer, front-end guy. And whenever I met with a new client, I used to open every conversation with what seems on the surface like a simple question. What's your goal? What is the thing that you're trying to achieve? What are we trying to do here?
seems like a pretty straightforward question, and some people had good answers to this, but a lot of people really don't. It's actually pretty nuanced, and I ended up in a lot of conversations that were something like this. Anybody ever kind of been here where you're working with somebody, the stakes are high, you don't have a ton of clarity on what it is you're trying to get done? It's frustrating. And I often found myself sort of being like this guy up here. But of course, you can't say that to a client. You can't, that's not a goal, that's not a damn goal to a client. Or at least you couldn't, until now. So, what I ended up doing, I noticed there was a need. There was a need my clients needed a way to refine their thinking around their goals, and then ideally attack them in a more effective manner. And that's what I set out to create. That's the damn goal system. That's what I'm going to teach you guys today. Hopefully you can share it with your own clients or project managers or whatever. So, to kick things off, before we get into the damn goal framework, let's talk about something that you're probably more familiar with. We'll talk about what has to be the most popular goal-setting framework out there. We're talking about SMART goals. Quick raise of your hands. Anybody heard of SMART goals? All right. Yeah, lots of people heard of SMART goals. If you've heard of SMART goals, help me out here. You know that they stand for something, or goals that are specific, measurable, actionable, realistic, and terrible. I hate this framework. No, you're actually right. It's not terrible. It's time down. But there are some issues with this, and by the time this talk's over, what I hope to do is convince you of that and show you one alternative. So what the damn goal framework does is actually borrows heavily from this, but it eliminates some things that I think are unnecessary, and it adds some things that I think are really important but missing. So let's just take a quick second to talk about this real fast. I'll tell you what irks me about this. Starting here with realistic. Now on the surface this seems like it makes sense, right? Like we want to shoot for things that are possible. The problem is that, in my experience, a lot of people have a hard time with realistic. If you ask your team to set a goal that's realistic, a lot of times they just dial it back and they think small. The problem with small goals is that they're not inspiring, and oftentimes there's a lot of competition for things at the lower level. So you have a harder time getting resources, harder time getting attention. I actually don't think realistic is a required aspect of a good goal. So I say we just get rid of that, and now we're down to 4. Next I want to talk about these two, specific and measurable. Again, seems like it makes sense. But when you think about it, what's the real difference between something that's specific and something that's measurable? Like if you can count it and measure it, isn't that specific enough? I think that it is. So let's get rid of specific, we'll keep measurable, and now we're down to 3. Actionable is good. We'll keep that. I'll tell you a little bit about how I think about that. Time bound is good too. I just think we should switch it to something we're more familiar with, which is a deadline. And already you can see the damn goal framework is starting to take shape here. So, as it is, we think about what we're going to do, how much we're going to do, when we're going to do it by. And these 3 will actually get you pretty far. But it turns out that there's one more thing we can add that'll take this to the next level. And that's negative consequences for failing to follow through. So I'm going to dig into each one of these briefly here in this talk. But at a high level, that's the damn goal framework. And it's actually, it's more than just kind of a fun thing to chat about. If you run your goals through this paradigm and use them to kind of refine the way you think about the projects you're taking on, it significantly increases the odds of following through and of achieving what it is you're after. So, first things first. By the way, it's my company that sent the photographer, and I'm really hoping these ones don't make it in to my boss's review slide. Anybody ever been here? Can you guys all read this? All right, cool. I love this cartoon because I've definitely been here. And I also think it's interesting because what it means is that if you look at it, the only time that was really required to finish the project is this little bit at the end here. And that begs the question, right? Like, why didn't we just take this, shift it all the way back to the beginning, do it right off the bat, and spend the rest of the week watching cat videos? And in order to find the answer, we need to talk to this gentleman here. Anybody know who this is?
Parkinson?
Yeah, actually. I've given this talk in like dozens of places. You're the first person who's ever called him out. Yes, this is Cyril Northcote Parkinson. He was a humorist, and in 1955, he wrote the words, "Work swells to fit the time allotted for its completion." Now, he was talking about bureaucrats, basically saying they can never get anything done on time. But it turns out that the sentiment is so universal that it's since been coined as Parkinson's Law. Work swells to fill the time allotted for its completion. And it's even sparked a number of corollaries, including the Horseman corollary. Work contracts to fit the time we give it. And my favorite, the Stock-Sanford corollary, which is that if you wait till the last minute, it only takes a minute to do. Now, the point here is not to set ridiculously short deadlines, though you certainly can. We all work on teams where people have set deadlines that don't really seem realistic, and that's not super productive. But what the point of this is to be aware that your mind can actually trick you. The further out a deadline gets pushed, the more complex a project appears to be, even though there's no real evidence to back up the assertion that it's more complex. So being aware of that, you can adjust your deadlines accordingly. That's kind of the idea here. Beware the deadline you shoot for yourself, or you set for yourself, and then the guidance that I give people is as short as possible, but no shorter. There's a couple questions that I usually use to help test that, but the most important one that I've used in the past is this. So when I'm thinking about a deadline, I will kind of set it using my gut instinct as to where it should be. And then I'll ask the question, is there any law of the universe or any law of physics that would prohibit me from doing this in half the time? And if the answer is yes, fine, forget it. But if the answer is no, then I will trim the deadline and ask the question again. So that's deadline. Actionable. This one's pretty cool. So when we talk about goals, a goal is actionable if the way it's set, well, first of all, it's actionable if you exert influence over the subject of the goal itself. In other words, are you focusing on something that you can actually control and change? If the answer is yes, it's actionable. Where I spend a lot of time thinking inside of this framework is, what action do you choose to take? And you're probably familiar with this as well. This is where our friend Pareto comes in. Very popular principle, Pareto's principle. Quick show of hands. Who here has heard of this at this point? Okay, yeah, I'm not the first guy to talk about this at all. But for anybody who hasn't heard of it, the basic theory behind the Pareto principle is simply that in any given system, the vast majority of outputs are usually driven by a small minority of inputs. So if you were to look at your business, say, most of your profits probably come from a small minority of your clients. Or most of your activity on any given app usually comes from a small minority of users. The way this applies to goals is, for any given goal, there are tons of actions you could take. And our job becomes trying to identify what these key action items are. What are the few things that are going to make the bigger difference than anything else? Anybody know how I'm doing on time?
7:28. You're at 15 minutes in.
Okay, cool, that's perfect. We're going to see if the sound works on this real quick. This is a great example of how the Pareto principle actually works.
Yeah, but you guys know why. Why? Because we never wrote a 4-chord song.
What's that? What's a 4-chord song?
All the greatest hits from the past 40 years just use 4 chords. Same 4 chords for every song. It's dead simple to write a pop hit.
Just 4?
Yeah, these 4 hit. 1, 2, 3, 4 chords.
So let me get this straight, Chicken Little. What you're trying to say is you can take those 4 chords, repeat them, and pump out every pop song ever. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
Fuck off. Yeah, fuck off, Chicken Little.
Just listen. Do you reckon
you guys think you'd be seeing here.
What is the name of that?
That is the, if you just Google the 4-chord song, Axis of Awesome, it should come right up. Now give me 1 second to figure out how to read. All right, you still in here? All right, cool. So the point there is a little bit abstract, but hopefully one that you'll remember, which is a very tiny minority of potential actions can oftentimes have an outsized influence on the outcome of your goal. In this case, if your goal was to, say, learn piano or learn an instrument in order to play songs for your friends, you could effectively do that by learning a very small number of chords rather than going through years of practice. A little bit of an oversimplification, but the point is there. Search for those few things which will have the most impact, and then you can kind of cut the time needed in order to be successful. All right, I'm not sure how to make it go full screen again. We'll just go from here. Any questions about the Pareto principle and how it applies to this? Okay. Now that's a great theory to have.
Just lost your airplane.
Great. Give me 1 second here.
Who's tried to connect and kick him out?
What's that?
Who's the mean? Who? No. There you go. I see you. I see you.
I'm messing with that.
Like somebody's iPhone's trying to connect.
It's okay. I can take it back.
We'll edit this in post.
Oh, it's an iPhone. Everybody shut your phones off. Nah, I'm just kidding.
Can you reclaim it? No?
I don't know.
So I took it. Now you try.
Aha! All right, we're back. All right. So, it's a great theory to have, but we don't live in the ivory tower. We're all in the trenches, right? We got things to do tomorrow. And so the real question is, how do you apply this? How do you figure out what those key action items are? Everybody's cases are going to be slightly different, but what I want to offer you is 4 questions that I use to whittle down my daily to-do list and try to identify these more critical tasks. Now, the first one is like a reduction question. Which of these items, if completed, will save me time next week, next month, etc.? What you're asking when you're asking this is really a systems question. How can I put something into place that's going to avoid me having to repeat work in the future? And if you identify that thing on your to-do list that fits this description, it can oftentimes be one of those key leverage points. Another thing that this answers is a concept known as the one decision that makes 1,000 decisions. In other words, how can I make a decision now to avoid having to continually make decisions again in the future? Again, that's setting up systems. And the book Essentialism has some really interesting things to say on this. But effectively, which of these items will save me time in the future if completed? The next one is repeat. If repeated over and over, would this virtually guarantee success? So one trap people can fall into is the trap of focusing too much on something that's really not important, but seems important in their mind. Anybody in here a musician? Quick show of hands. Cool. Photographers as well. A lot of people who are new to the arts often fall into a trap of thinking that their art would be better if they just had better equipment. But if you apply this question, if I replaced my camera every single day over and over and over again, would I actually get closer to the goal of being a good photographer? No, you wouldn't. You would look like a professional photographer or a professional guitarist, but you know that you could hand Clapton like the most beat up, rugged looking guitar in the world. He can play it because he focused on what mattered. It's not about the gear, it's about what actually creates progress. In the case of music, it would be practice. So something that's repeatable. 2 questions to help whittle down the list even further. First of all, timeliness. Based on my deadline, is this the most important thing right now? Or am I working on something, am I procrastinating by doing something that's not really important now? And is this still important, or has the situation changed? Quick show of hands, who's gotten stuck here on a project that all of a sudden you put your head up like 3 months later and you're like, why are we even doing this anymore? It's happened? Yeah, it happens all the time. So, hope those are helpful. A couple of questions that I use to whittle down my list on a regular basis. Measurable. In a room full of developers, I doubt I'll have to pitch very hard for measuring progress. They're data-driven people. I'll say 2 things though. Measuring helps not only to show your progress, but also to keep morale up when the going gets hard. So when you're shooting for big, hairy goals, a lot of times you're going to run into stuff. It's going to go bad. If you've been measuring your progress along the way, you can show that to your team. Helps to keep morale up, keep them marching. The one thing I'll advise though, or I would recommend, is that you be very careful to measure something that matters. This quote is usually attributed to Einstein. From what I've heard, there's actually no evidence he's ever said it. But I think it's still an important one to take a look at. Everybody here is familiar with the fact that you can measure things that don't really matter at all. And being mindful of that when you're setting your goals or helping your team to set goals is important. So try always to measure something that matters. And the last, so before I go any further, talk about deadlines and how to avoid tricking yourself into thinking something's more complex than it is. Talk about action steps and how to identify which steps are most likely most important. We'll talk about the importance of measuring and measuring something that matters. As I mentioned in the beginning, those 3 will actually get you pretty far. But there's one more step you can implement when it really counts. And that is to instill negative consequences for failing to follow through. What this basically works on is the theory of loss aversion, which basically says that as humans, we are hardwired to avoid the pain of loss over almost everything else. So the perceived pleasure of gain doesn't hold as much sway with us as the perceived pain of loss. And by itself, this can actually make people pretty risk averse, but we can use it to our advantage by setting up stakes to use this like in a productive way. Some people here may have heard of the site stick.com. It's where you make little bets on your goals. Basically, you put money up, and if you accomplish your goal, I believe you get the money back. If you don't get it, it gets donated to a charity you hate. What's the other one? BeMiner is another one, where you can set goals, and if you don't follow through on your action steps, it will automatically charge your credit card. So these are both ways to kind of instill this. There are other ways too. You create competitions between your teams. You can hire a coach, and sometimes that sunk cost in hiring the coach will be enough to make you follow through on what it is you wanted to do in the first place. But the basic idea is, if you really want to increase the odds of adherence, set stakes up front. Now, this is simple, but it's not easy. In fact, in my experience, this is the hardest thing to do. Your natural inclination, if you were going to set up stakes, would be to set up stakes that you can afford to lose. Because that's literally loss aversion working right there. It's trying to keep you from losing something you actually care about. So I don't put this up here and pretend like it's a simple thing to accomplish. But if you can actually pull it off, I mean, there's research from the guys who created Stick. They were both working out of Yale. And there's research to show that this alone can increase adherence by 200 to 300%. So you're like 2 to 3 times more likely to accomplish your goal if you implement this. Not easy though. So that's basically it in a nutshell. You've got the deadline. You want to make sure that your goal is actionable, measurable, and when it really counts, you can instill negative consequences for failing to follow through. The other reason that this works is because it is kind of fun to talk about, right? Like if you need your team to be accomplishing things, it's important that they're always talking about the goals and revisiting them and keeping each other accountable. And so this is not just about more effective methods for actually following through, it's also just kind of fun. And that's another reason that it works. Are there any damn questions?
Going once, going twice.
All right, well, thank you for your time.
So we talked about the resolutions earlier. Now we have a framework of how to achieve all those resolutions. So set your damn goals. We'll take a 10 to 15 minute break, eat more pizza, mingle a little bit more, make friends. James looking for friends, and we'll reconvene in a little bit. Thank you.
Your face looks super familiar though. Oh, okay, that's right. Were you in San Diego or you were in Park?
You're gonna love my goal setting.
I'm going to check it out.
Yeah, my whole system there.
B minor, W.
B minor.
B minor.
I've been so long, since like 2 Thursdays ago. Yeah. She's been in October, right?
Also knows that I was in my game.
Well, you know what? That's actually, I don't usually talk about this, but that's another one. Another reason that I don't like it is it's actually longer and agreed upon. Did you know, so when that system was first created, it was created in a management, management monthly article. And the A stood for accept, which I had never even heard of until I did the original research.
Attainable.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just like so many
different
things. Yeah, people.
But yeah, that's one of the other reasons. I just like, honestly, when this whole thing first started, it was because everybody had different ideas of what SMART stood for. And I was like, I should take it and make my own thing out of it. Do you want to use this? Or do you have slides? Fresh batteries in it.
I have another call that there's no podium on this close out. I think I'm just gonna do
There's a podium here if you want.
Oh, is there? Okay.
I'm mostly just gonna And we're also on our feet most of the day in the innovation lab. So it was definitely tiring. Each day was done.
What are you gonna talk about?
And they're all right now. So what we wanted to do, there's only two. But he didn't stay on there. Lewis did not. So we got 3 other engineers.
Oh yeah, so the doors, you have to
Different schedules with the engineers, have everybody work. And hopefully by then, we're in the throes of the budget finalized, we'll actually have to so by then we should know.
I was asking, like my 100% expression, like I call them red, right? So they kind of like, they agree.
It's hard with the larger group, but It's always interesting. Looks like we did well on the pizza. I cut it in half just because I got tired of having to take the pizza back home and eat it myself and get fat. So next time we'll bring it back up and we'll have some more. All right, so if you don't have your chip together, guys, gonna tell us how it's done. I won't do an intro. He'll take care of that for himself.
Okay. Hi again, I'm Gal. Today we're going to talk about Ruby's new JIT. JIT stands for just-in-time, as in just-in-time compiler, because that's one of the best ways to get Ruby to run faster. So the subtitle is towards Ruby 3x3 because Matt's promised us we're going to have Ruby 3 be 3 times faster than Ruby 2. So we're going to cover some background about compilers, interpreters, virtual machines. We're going to see a little bit of code snippets, and I try to explain how it all works together. So if you don't have background, that's good, because we're going to start things from really basics. Then I'm going to show Ruby 2.6, how to use it, how it works. Then we're going to see some benchmarks. So about me, I'm a full stack web. I've done some mobile. Been coding since I was 12, so I've worked with so many technologies and I can pick up anything quickly. Recently, only focusing on Elixir and Ruby on Rails. And I'm also a slow motorcycle racer. You can see me right there. And yeah, I just bumped up to level 2 out of 3 groups. So I'm very proud of myself. Yeah, so now if you see in the photo, it says 1 here, so now it's 2. Okay, so this is a quote from Mats. If you don't know, Mats is the person who invented Ruby. He's the lead maintainer, and is what we call BDFL, which is a benevolent dictator for life, which is one way to organize projects, but it's very effective because everybody's going the same direction. He calls all the shots about the architecture and where Ruby's going. And in 2015, he announced in a keynote RubyConf that it's going to be 3 times faster, as I said. So one caveat is it's going to be faster than Ruby 2.0. And when he said that, it's already been like Ruby 2.3, which was much faster. So yeah, but it looks very promising. The Achilles heel of Ruby always been their performance, because it's very productive, it's very expressive. A lot of people love Ruby for what it is. But then you end up in production, and it takes 10 times what it would take in other languages, and it's a major drawback. So this hopefully by Ruby 3, the decision will be easier to go with Ruby. So let's talk a little bit about programming languages. So we have programming languages in different hierarchies. It starts with what's called machine languages, which are exactly what the CPU does. The CPU doesn't know about objects. It doesn't know about any functional paradigms. It just knows to run through a list of instructions and do them one by one. This is, of course, simplified. Saltok's going to gloss a lot of minute details, but you can think about the processor as just hardware that receives a list of instructions, goes through the list one by one, and then you end up with an output. So machine languages, and we're going to see it in the next slide. We're going to see examples of all of this. So if it's not understandable, it's fine. But machine languages are languages that each instruction in your code, each line, maps exactly to one instruction that the CPU will perform. So that's how it all started. Machine language is usually called assembly. The next level up is the low-level languages. So that would be something like C language, which it shares a lot of the same abstractions. So the CPU knows about things like stack, it knows how to allocate memory, it knows how to reference memory, specific memory addresses, but as I said, it doesn't know about objects or a lot of abstractions we used to from our programming languages. So the low-level languages are easier to write, it's much more expressive, it's much easier to read and maintain, gives you stuff like variables. The CPU doesn't know about variables, but the low-level languages can reference like global variables, static variables, all sorts of variables, and but it still converts very nicely to machine language because we don't introduce a lot of new abstractions. So it's very easy to translate from low-level language to machine language, and then have the CPU just execute it. So the next level up is what we call high-level languages, which of course it's all relative, but in general, all the object-oriented languages with dynamic types, either with or without dynamic types, are considered high-level languages. And there are high-level languages because they introduce a lot of abstractions that the CPU does not recognize, and they rely on another translation mechanism that works in real time to translate between the instructions that know about garbage collection, dynamic types, and objects into something that the CPU can run. So I know it's might be a lot, but we're going to see examples, and maybe it will make sense later. So this is an example of 2 lines of C code, and this is the machine language representation of it. So I just wrote down these lines inside Date Printer. You can run the command on your Linux or Mac. You can run gcc-s, and you get this file. So it might look intimidating, but it's not that complicated. So we include a reference to standard library, so we can do printf. That's a system call that knows how to print things. We assign here variables, which is just for year, month, and date. And then we have this format string. It's the same thing with Ruby, but the JavaScript has something similar. And we call it printf with these parameters. And in the assembly language, we transform it to very similar representation, but with different abstractions. So over here, we don't have variables. So what we do have is this thing, RSP, it's the stack pointer, because CPUs work with chunks of memory that, so you have 2 types of memory that the CPU can reference. It's either in the heap, which is just the general purpose, or the stack. And the stack is usually used for local variables, like here, because the scope of these variables is only in here. So I don't think it matters if we go over all the exact details here, but it's more like to see the difference between what the Ruby bytecode looks like. We can go over this so we can see the difference. So when we compile the C code, we reference the stack pointer. We assign the stack pointer 16 because we have 16 bytes in the stack. That's the size of the stack that we need. We put these numbers. The assignments are just places we move into locations in memory. So we put 2019 into offset -12. We put 1 into -8. And then we move those memory locations into registers. Registers are just memory slots that live inside the CPU. And then we reference this label, which is LC1 is here. It's just going to be a static location inside the executable. So when we're going to compile it into whatever platform we use, we're going to have this string embedded in our compiled code, and we can reference that. So after we moved all these things in memory and into registers, we can just call printf, which is just a system call. And this is how CPUs work. We have this code that if you spend some time thinking about it, it's not very hard to translate it into here. It's just moving memory around. But this is very, like, we're not introducing any new ideas to the CPU that that would complicate things. So this is the machine code, and this is what we get when we compile Ruby code. I don't know if the text is visible back there. So this is just, it's the same code. We assign variables and we call printf. And now we can see what's the assembly code of Ruby looks like. This is just a debug output that the disassembler shows, like you can ignore this. But this line, on the first line we see that the Ruby assembly code references something like put objects 2019. Because in Ruby, even integers are objects. And of course, the processor can't do that. It doesn't know what an object. Like different languages have different notions of objects. But because what's going to run it is going to be the Ruby interpreter or Ruby virtual machine, whatever you want to call it, we can have an instruction that puts object. And same thing here. We have an instruction that does set local, which just sets local variables. And as we've seen, the CPU works with registers, it works with stack, it works with memory addresses, but it doesn't have the notion of local variables. But here we can reference abstractions from the Ruby world. So after we set all these memory locations with the right values, we put the string inside some kind of, so in practice it is kind of some kind of stack, but it's not the CPU stack. So we just put things as parameters on the stack to be called later. And then we have this opt send without block. And if you know, if you're familiar with Ruby, every function call, or like you call it function call in the CPU world, but every method invocation in Ruby is implemented with send. With send has this dynamic lookup of the location that you're going to invoke, because you can override method in real time. So instead of just calling printf, which knows exactly where we want to jump to continue execution, we're going to have this function called opt_send that's going to go look up where is the code that we want to invoke. And we have all these parameters that are very, very Ruby specific. So if we look at them side by side, we see it's completely different. So the upside, of course, is we can write Ruby and we can override method on the fly, and we can do a lot of wonderful things like dynamic typing. But of course, the downside is every time we do something like put object, it has to figure out we want to put object and call a different function. And even stuff, simple stuff like addition might get very complicated with Ruby, because you can override the plus sign on integer and make it do something else. So Ruby has to look up what you want to do every time you add integers. And of course, there are little optimizations for specific cases like the plus sign, but in general, everything gets way more complicated when you have this extra abstraction instead of using the CPU directly. So, yeah.
Those look like two completely different instruction sets. Would that be run on the same CPU and the same?
Yeah. So this is just x64. That's just assembly, and this is what the Ruby assembly looks like. So this is going to run on the Ruby virtual machine. It's called YARV. That's something that's rewritten, I think like, about 4 years ago, they've rewritten the whole Ruby virtual machine. And that is the point, that they're so different because this is something that is very Ruby specific. And it gives you the benefits of using objects, but it's just very slow. And then comes the bridging between the two is the JIT, because the JIT promises to take this, compile it into this in real time, and you get to have the best of both worlds. You can have the performance, and you get to have the niceties of modern language. So I can show some code and how it looks like. Okay, so first let's look at a little bit more of C code, and it's relatively simple. We have a main function, that's the convention in C to start functions with called main. We have a counter, and what we want to do is to see if the argument is prime number or not, which is it's intentionally very convenient way to find a prime number. It's very inefficient. I just want to have like something that takes some time to show the differences. So if we start with C, so let's go over it quickly. We read the argument, and if we don't have an argument, that's kind of like the default. You can run with that. And we just iterate from I until that number, and we try to find if this is divisible without remainder. And if it does, yeah, I guess like the actual implementation isn't pretty interesting, but. And you see there's something very similar in RubyLand. I initialize instantiate prime number class with the number, and then when I call prime, it just counts the number of times it's divisible. And if it's 64, it means it's prime number because that's the number of permutations of these numbers. So let's see how it looks when we run it. So first we want to compile the So we just run GCC to compile the prime.c. Okay, so now it's compiled, and I can run this command, which is just time. In Linux, Unix, Mac, you can just prefix your command with time, and it tells you how long it took. And we can see that, yeah, we got 2.25 seconds to do it in C. And if we choose a different number, it's a little faster. Probably just a fluke. Should be faster all the time. Yeah, okay. It's not. It's usually with benchmarks, there's some noise. Probably something else happened in the background. So we get about 3/4 of a second when we run it. And when we run it with Ruby, code that does pretty much the same. It's the same algorithm. Takes way, way longer. Just one small thing about how I wrote the benchmark, because I do want to have the JIT running in the background the next iteration. This time I didn't run it with the JIT. But, so what I do, I run it a few times, and then I sleep to let the JIT do its thing, and then I start the benchmark, which is not really comparing apples to apples, because with the C code, I don't need to do that. It's always compiled. But just I want to show exactly how a JIT improves. So without the JIT, it took 10 seconds to run this code. Which is, of course, that's why Ruby gets so much bad press. I don't want to do this with JavaScript just to not embarrass us. But all other languages, common languages like Python, JavaScript, definitely Java had JIT for a long time. So it's very optimized JIT. So what we have with Ruby is very simplistic, it's still experimental, but it's a really good milestone because once you have the JIT working, you can, like the optimizations are much more accessible. So let's see how we run this with JIT. So what I did here is another small script I wrote. So in here, we just loop in a bash script, and we look for CC. That's just a compiler, so I just want to see the compiler running in the background just to show that it actually compiles. So let's run it with the JIT. Okay, so now what we do, we run the same prime RB script, but we run it with JIT. And I also run it with the save temps, which is more like for debugging purposes, but I can show you the intermediate representation of the JIT, which may be interesting. So we see here a script on the right is looking for compiler invocations. When I run it, you see it starts compiling in the background. So it's very simplistic, it's very experimental, as I said. What the Ruby process does is just runs GCC in the background. It just forks another process, just compiles the C code, and then loads it into memory. So we see it's about 25% faster with the JIT, which is it's pretty amazing considering that you don't have to change your code, you don't have to do anything, and it's just a very early implementation of the JIT that's going to get much better. So we can see on, because I did the save temps, we can look at the temporary directory, and I found the temporary directory somewhere here. See like var folders, that's a file it actually compiles, so you can just open it. So it's right here. Or I can just grep for my prime anything site C. And yeah, and you can see it compile it into a specific file. Okay, so let's see what we have here. So how this simple JIT implementation works just takes the instruction set that we've seen earlier, that after it compiles the class, we get YARV instruction set, and it just takes every instruction and takes its C code and just pastes it into a file, and just compiles this file as it is. Just runs the instruction one by one with a little bit of caching policy that if something changes, it revokes the JIT code. But it's surprisingly simple. So the comments here are the original instruction. like original YARV assembly instruction. And what we have here is just the same implementation that the interpreter would have in its own C code. So we see, remember we've seen the put object instruction. So this is just the C code behind it. The put object just put the value inside the stack. So we see our code uses multiplication, so it just compiles an instruction that does opt-mult, which is the multiplication, which is going to call the same code. Yeah, so it's very simplistic and it's very repetitive. So it means in the next iteration, instead of just compiling each instruction on its own, it could just compile the whole thing into maybe its own function and be much more sophisticated how it organizes code to avoid the repetition. Yeah, so that's how it works. So let's see one last thing.
So if you were doing 20 assignments, it's going to put object 20 times?
Yeah, there are a lot of things that if some instructions could be maybe reordered, like that's a common optimization that some compilers do. They just reorder some instructions because they know it's not going to affect the output, but yeah, it could save time. Can actually show.
I wonder though if they do it because they never know if it's going to be the same definition of the same method each time because Ruby is dynamic.
Yeah, but if you redefine it mid-method, you usually don't care, right? So maybe you can have this laxing of the rules that you can redefine things between methods. You can't redefine it inside a method because usually when you redefine, it doesn't matter if like the exact millisecond that it happened. See? Right. Yeah, but it's a good point. But you can see even here, I think you can see we moved this memory location into this register, EAX, and then we move EAX into ESI, and then we assign 0 to EAX. I think it's very plausible that we can just move this memory location inside ESI, like if we want to optimize this. There's a lot of optimization that happen if you add the specific flags to GCC to optimize your code. Otherwise, it does stuff that are very trivial that are going to be easier to debug, whether to perform. Yeah, so I suppose we're going to have I don't know, at least twofold improvement in the JITted code compared to what we have now. One last thing I have to show is when MATS announced the 3x3, they also announced the reference benchmark. And the idea was benchmarks are very hard and they have they're all opinionated. So they came up with like a reference benchmark, which is called opt-caret, which is try to have something that is meaningful, like real world example. So, but still like that is blocked on the interpreter or the virtual machine instead of something that might be blocked on I/O. Like something like Rails it interacts with a lot of databases, a lot of drivers. And with the opt-caret, it's mostly blocked on the interpreter. And what it is just a game emulator. It's an emulator for NES. So what you could do is run the opt-caret. Opt-caret is it's a short for optimization caret. So that's how they look at this. This is actually run with Ruby in the background, so it's totally playable. Where is it? Yeah, it actually works. And you can see the frame per second here, and that's kind of like the benchmark. How fast? How many frames per second? And Ruby 2.0 only had 20 frames per second running there. And we're already about twice as fast, which is it's pretty promising for their goal to have it 3 times faster. And I think this,
Who's more excited about being able to run Mario than JIT itself?
okay, so what they did, they run the same code with the JIT, and this is from the, forgot his name, that's his last name, Kokuban, that's the person that actually implemented the JIT in Ruby 2.6. There was another person that implemented a much more sophisticated JIT for previous versions of Ruby, but it didn't get merged. Maybe it was too risky, maybe it had some, I don't know, side effects. But this simplistic one was made by this guy, and he published his benchmarks. So you can see the latest Ruby, the Ruby 2.6 dev with the JIT gets more than 64 frames per second, which is, yeah, I guess I was wrong. So 2.0 had, so we're about twice as fast by 2.6. So it looks very promising. I think I was personally skeptical when I saw that keynote with the 3 times faster. It sounds a little bit too much, but yeah, it looks like we're getting there. Yeah, and that's all I have. Anybody more questions? No? All right, so that's it. Feel free to reach out. I'm on socials, LinkedIn, Facebook, whatever.
All right, thank you, Gal. We still have the room for half an hour, so please mingle. I guess your damn goal for the next half an hour is to drink all the soda. Go ahead, and have a good night. Thank you for coming. Hope to see you at the next one. Please reach out if you want to see that. Thank you. I've seen some assembly code again. I love the college days do that for fun. It's one of those things that learning assembly was the sort of like the aha moment for me in software development. It was the aha moment for me. Yeah. You start at 8. Right? Yeah. 7:59 or something. Oh, good stuff.
Is that faster or slower than you were thinking?
No, I'm trying to be in for 30. I think I could have like dragged it on. It's like 30 minutes.
No, it was good. I think it just depends on people how are they able to follow some of the stuff that we can't control. But it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. But I think you did good enough to sort of show. I mean, it was an interesting thing to see. It's hard to run.
Did you build the Mario?
No, that's the reference.
Mario built on
No, I have an emulator. It's actually really running this emulator on the so it is the same game. It's in the file. There's all sorts of emulators.
Are you aware of the camera right now? Like, oh my God, I never know what to do with my hands. So that's interesting.
I think it's trying to be a little natural. It's hard.
Exactly. It's like, how do I walk? I forget what I normally do with these. That's cool though, man.
Yeah. Just, yeah, so Technically, it's illegal. I heard that's illegal. Yeah, that's but the emulator is not the game itself. It's not the, yeah. So if you don't like to download the Mario, you have to download the Mario or someone else. Yeah, so download the emulator. That's why it's gonna be gone. All the other systems just
I'm not a but I was watching everybody else, and they seemed like they were trying to get it over. Yeah, sure. It's a good package. You are compared to me, man. Can I get one like this too?
Sure, yeah. I mean, I'm here 20 minutes.
Yeah, ideal presidential thing. Yeah, oh, yeah, that's a good one. Let's get them all in right. Only maybe, where's the flag? There's his baby.
One more. That's like how I am with my cameras. Like, that's how I am with my camera. Like, it's my baby.
Yeah, that's my just like saving
Yeah. That's cool, whatever machine you got. I'm sure like you maximize the potential out of it. Yeah.
My other one's very
How do you like the MacBooks these days?
It just forced me. Yeah, I guess so. Yeah.
Ah, okay. Yeah, you can't stand them these days?
I don't like it. Like, I never liked them. I like Linux. They have to do everything different, and they're just annoying.
Yeah, super cool, man. Thanks. Nice little insight. I've been trying to figure out myself recently.
Yeah, so it's almost surprisingly affordable. So if you just take the time to begin, you'll realize it just takes time, these muscles or whatever. You can figure out, like this documentation.
Thank you. Right here? Oh, wow. Are you guys working out of the... Oh, no, I'm thinking New York. We work out of this. Where are you guys based at? You have your own office? How long have you been going?
So these things, that's the
Capital Factory a year ago.
Are you guys founders or?
Just the
You guys are based on.
Worked for a year, I can't work. Growing since. What's that? I'm gonna take off the dogs out.
Yeah, me too.
So is there any, so I need a group left, can I get maybe like you and both of the speakers and guidance hand?
I think, yeah. Yeah, I would say, yeah. Holly, Yusuf, me, and Gal. That would be pretty good. Oh, yeah, Gal and Justin. The two organizers and me.
Yeah, can we do that? Do you mind just getting it together? We can do it right here. That'd be Is that okay?
Patient numbers is one, you go to this portal here, log in, create the same patient again. Putting it all together, building, all that stuff together.
That's a good idea.
I'm only partially blood from the flash all night long.
Yeah.
Did you really need both eyes though?
Both eyes? I need one at least. Well, actually, yes, you do need both for depth perception.
You wanna be a pirate? Let's get out here. I think you can make a cool pirate.
You think I'll make a cool pirate?
Yeah, you do those things. I think you would.
Why are you?
Eye patch, you look like a good pirate.
Why are you doing this to me? I like both my eyes.
You don't have to get rid of an eye. Wear an eye patch.
You can leave your glasses on if you're worried about reflection.
No, I don't like the glasses. I only wear them when I'm looking at screens.
Front and center, man. You guys are the head honchos here.
Let's do this. Can we move that? That'd be awesome.
My 9 souls are being taken away. My 9 souls.
I like the thing. Covers part of my face. Yeah, so it makes it better. That's what the beard is for. Nice. Yeah, I can't. I think we're good. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. It was great meeting you.
Likewise. I think. Are you working with us again next week?
Possibly, yeah.
Okay, cool.
I don't even know how they found me. I got the email and I was like,
So you're on Splento?
no, I'm not.
Oh, are you sure you're supposed to be here? No. I'm just
I am.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. But yeah, I think it was maybe just like Google or Yelp or something. Yeah. But yeah, I actually ran into him. I met him at a networking event recently. Yeah.
Oh, no way.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Good stuff on Instagram.
Oh, thanks. But yeah, nice meeting you. Yeah, I don't know if you're into the photos or if I ran out.
Okay, me too.
But,
Actually, my story's worse. My wallet's at home. My car is in the parking garage. So I'm gonna Uber home, get my wallet, Uber back. But I'll write.
I can lend you like.
No, it's a credit card.
The downstairs one?
Credit card home in the garage. Thanks. I'm like 5 minutes away.
I'll lend you his credit card.
Yeah. Well, I did have that new Tesla I wanted.
here, just leave your email and your name.
Appreciate it. Yeah, if you shoot me a quick message, I'll drop you a link to upload the photos.
It was a good talk.
Nice.
Yeah, I'll be.
I haven't seen Assembly in a while.
Yeah, I was worried like I might leave. Yeah, maybe it's too fast, too technical.
Yeah, I mean, I think you struck a good balance between kind of showing.
Yeah. I'm thinking like you still get the bigger picture even if you don't, if you're missing details.
Yeah.
I'm sure they have like.
Yeah, it's less important how the assembly works.
To be honest,
I just like. I think I'm just.
See what's happening.
well, I get that.
That was good.
No, it's
I haven't. Have you tried?
We're so
I imagine
our social media team.
I read the rail that doesn't speed up rails off the good against IO back, but
Yeah, not just IO bound, it's how the JIT is so simple. Yeah, it's very.
I'm starting to think
simply
not
just copy
because
paste and there's a lot of overhead.
keep this in Spanish, which I accidentally changed. Okay.
yeah.
That's like, I'm not sure if now I totally screwed it. So that's my.
I feel it's just like a stepping stone to optimize.
So our company that I work for, our social media team is like sort of trialing Splento in order for them to match photographers up with our events. We do like 600 events in JavaScript in 80 countries. And Splento, it says that they've got a network of freelance photographers all over the place. Wouldn't take us one source. The fact that you're not on the platform is weird, but maybe they'll try to get you.
Yeah, I'm already on.
I'm just wondering how far we are from.
Well, good for them. They're hustling. So.
Yeah. I mean,
Prime tester is so esoteric way of so I feel like
apparently they're going to try and find you work.
because even if JavaScript.
Depending on your availability, you might be shooting our next event, which is on.
I spent a lot of time trying to find
Did you talk to him?
Yeah, because like the JIT works really well.
Yeah.
So that's why it's so comfortable. And I tried 3 different variations and it just didn't do much. So you really have to do like a lot of math in a tight loop.
Yeah.
With the current shape to work well.
To show its muscle, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, if you shoot me your info by email, I'll be sure to hang on to it. And then even if I don't know how many more events we'll have here, but I'll share your info with the other organizers.
Because
You
now
said
it does like
organize a lot of meetups here.
the optimizes the inside of the loop, like the block inside.
Yeah.
I'm gonna take off the.
Keep it. Yeah. Thanks for coming in. Anything else you need from me?
Jump every now and then.
Nice to meet you.
Yeah, it's hard to find things in the wild like that you would actually need.
Yeah, but we'll get there.
Yeah. It's damn good. I have problems with smart metrics myself.
Yeah?
They're always the wrong. Well, I like them. I like the framework, but sometimes it's just goes the wrong direction.
Well, Gal and I were saying too that it's like there's not even really agreed upon meetings for all the letters.
Yeah, I had different meanings for
several.
Couple.
I was saying that the A originally it was originally launched in almost like an HBR article good for a magazine called like or something. But the original office, when they wrote it, A stood for assignment. And I was like, what the hell? Like, I bet nobody's ever heard of that one.
Yeah.
You know?
Well, I also
They made it their own now.
always been upset with time bound. For some reason, it just doesn't, it's not catchy. It's just like, no, you just try to make something and
You started with smart, and then you tried. But to be fair, that's kind of how I started with the damn thing too. So it's like I literally
negative consequences.
Yeah, it's what Tim Ferriss calls stakes. But I wanted to be able to swear at clients, so
yeah, that's good.
yeah. Still working on the final goal system. So for now, it's the damn goal system.
Yeah, fidelity.
Intelligent, discipline, or no, wait, I'm spelling fidelity. Oh, that one's gonna take some time.
Yeah.
So do you also co-organize Austin RB or no?
Yeah, it's more or less the same group.
Yeah. I don't go to Austin RB because it's on Mondays.
Yeah.
Morning group on Mondays. But I used to go.
It's different. Like, I'd say 20% of people who go here go to the Ruby.
Also, no, I think last time that being, and it was like more than a year ago, but it was like more new crowd to Austin RB. Like here, it's like people usually have like a little bit more experience.
Yeah.
Like on average. Like the Austin RB, we had like, I don't know, like 20 boot campers that came like with a talk, not as in depth as this, but something pretty in depth was, and I feel like got a lot of legs there. Like I think the only news and it was like maybe half the depth of this.
But now that there aren't as many boot camps.
Well,
Some closed down.
Huh?
Some of the ones around here closed down. Or no?
Yeah, I think some of it had to do with the legislature behind for-profit colleges. Because a lot of them were for-profit, but you had to have show a certain percentage of success rate. Some of them might have closed down because either they couldn't achieve it or
So I know Iron Yards.
Yeah, that was back in 2017.
I mean, I think some of it was, specifically for Ruby, Rails kind of declined a little bit.
I think it's just the demand comes with, like the supply comes with the demand, that's what happened.
Yeah.
So it's not as hot that you can train somebody with 3 months and have him employable with decent salaries. I don't think it's like the demand is less, it's just the
Yeah.
It was insane, like in 2015 era, 2014, it was crazy. The demand was really absurd.
It's more fractured than it's just Python and JavaScript. Huge right now.
Right.
.NET has been growing.
Isn't .NET still growing?
I feel like it is. It's still number 2 or 3 in the TO. I mean, and Microsoft is open sourcing now, so they're going in the right direction.
Yeah, but still, like I can't trust them. I feel like they're open sourcing one thing and they're gonna lock in. As long as you're in their ecosystem, it's just gonna be tax man for Hoover.
Who do you trust right now? 'Cause I'm in the Google ecosystem, pretty much, and I don't really trust Google either.
What do you mean, like cloud?
Like I have a Google phone.
Oh, I have a Google phone. Yeah.
I'm on the Google Fi. Like they know everything I'm doing. Gmail.
Right. Yeah, but it's one thing, like, personally, that like, you want to build a business that, I always think about it as it's like the coffee shops that open. Like, you can't win with your coffee shop unless you own the property. Because if you fail, you fail. And if you succeed, you're just gonna raise your rent just barely to the point where you, like you're barely breathing, eating up all your margins. So you basically can't succeed in the long term. It's only like, you know, maybe you have a couple of years where you can make profits. So I feel like we're like going to ecosystems like Microsoft or Oracle or any of these, you can just charge you more and more. Like if you get really successful, they'll write rules just to charge you more.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I've been in companies where it's, oh, you wanna use this, where you're gonna need to have our BI tool. Like, they just package like other Microsoft stuff.
Oh, yeah.
If you need to get certified, I used to work for state government for a while, and they needed to be Microsoft certified, so you needed to use the Microsoft products. Oracle is not that different.
Yeah. Yeah, it's terrible. Yeah, so
But
I'm trying to stay on open source as much as possible.
yeah,
Do you guys ever worry that there'll be like a general developer licensing process, the same way that architects have to be licensed and doctors have to be licensed?
I think it'd be so fractured. I mean, there are, communities of certification that you can go through. It just depends how much value you put into it.
Yeah, but I mean, like, do you ever worry that it'll be
It might be mandatory for certain companies. State government, project management's a great example where if you're the PMI work and have your PMP certification, you can work for the state, but you can't unless you've got non-profit. There are perfectly horrible people who've passed their PMP exam.
I think with developers, what makes it so like unregulated is the ability to work remote. So then, if they do regulate things, they can't regulate people in Europe, and then Eastern European programmers will be even more attractive. They're already on the heels. I feel like if you find the good ones, like anywhere in the world, you can find good ones. It's not like you can get basically half-price programmers for a long time. So I feel like if they're gonna do it here, that would be a great, like